So there we go. So let's do an art critique now. Today, oops, I'm thinking on a map, King of the Hill map, of Highpass. Let's go to Highpass. So a couple of disclaimers for this art critique. I'm gonna talk a little bit about game design, but this is not exactly a game design discussion. I'm gonna focus mostly on the visuals here. And also I'm following Feldman's methods for doing art critiques, which involves 4 steps in order: description, then analysis, interpretation, and judgment, lastly. In the description I'll describe what I see. On the analysis I'll talk about the elements of art. On the interpretation I'm gonna interpret the creative vision behind the art here. And on the judgment step I'm going to call this art successful or unsuccessful, basing myself on the principles of art here for this artwork. So with all that said, without further ado, let us begin. So actually I don't know. I was using Scout previously to take a look at the map and stuff, but apparently he has a shorter view model, character model, so I don't know. Maybe the spy has a normal one, I wouldn't know. Whatever, let's go with Pyro. Yeah, okay. So, okay, with all that said, let's begin the art critique. First step, description. So what do I see? Well, I'm in some sort of building here, made of bricks. Watch your step, there's a message there. Behind me there's the red company logo, reliable excavation, demolition, nerve vent, lights. Over here some sort of room that I have no access to. Okay, yeah. It's sturdy enough to hold on my hammer thing bit on it. The bar jack. Inside some crates, some stairs. A door, not much stuff. What else? Public notice closed. Bunch of details. I'm not gonna describe every single thing, just what it's deemed most noticeable. And I'm not gonna describe things that I have already described when I can help it. And here we have some pipes, I guess. And here's some sort of communication device, let's say. And here the locker that we know inside, full of medical supplies and ammunition. A clock, a box, dynamite, barrels, and some sort of garage door that we can get out. And look at that. We have another building, over there some rocks, over here a bridge in the distance, and this gate, I guess, this fence. Yeah, well, kind of a gate, I guess. What else? Some cones, or more barrels, vegetation. What else? When we get inside the building, here the walls seems to be made out of bricks again, just not red bricks, I guess. A truck, garage door. When we get out here, a tire. This barrel contains something radioactive. Watch your step. An arrow sign, another building, bunch of buildings. This one is made with wooden planks and sport beams. More rocks, again buildings, barrels. Might as well just look over here also. This one is biohazard material. Over here we have some sort of cave with a... Is it a truck over there? A car of sorts. Pipe. This thing here. Wooden platform things. What else? And yeah, and over here we have been already. Except here. Over here, more pipes. Some sort of fluid container. I don't know if it's gas or... I don't know what's inside here. natural gas, oil, I don't know. Warning, high pressure, and we can look at this more pipes and tubes and stuff down there. We can see a little bit of it. There's the maintenance indicators and controls there, I guess, for pressure and stuff, I would imagine. Anything else over here? Wow, since this is Christmas time, I guess we have this detail there on that part. Okay, sure. Let's describe it. What else? The pickups. For the pickups, there was a lengthy discussion about this previously. I can go with either. I can both consider the mapping separate from the pickups and consider the pickups a part of it. I think it makes more sense for me to consider the pickups as a part of it. I can go either way. Previously, often I have considered the pickups not a part of the map, and have even done the art critique exclusively on the small ammo box, try to compare stuff a little. But anyway, but right now I'm gonna consider them a part of it. Ideally, we would do an art critique. During gameplay, possibly, like in next spectator mode. But thing is, that's like another way I could do this, but I don't know. I think doing a critique during gameplay is way better at focusing at game design itself, but if we're focusing just on the visuals of the map, I think we don't need to dive too deep into game design. Anyway, moving on. Warning, unsafe structure inside the building. More Christmas lights, I guess. Not usually a part of this map, but we're in the season. Stairs, wooden door, what else? Shelf here with some stuff, milk cans, some gasoline canister or something, boxes. What else is my box? About a window, and over here we can take a look at a bunch of other buildings. In the middle of it, a bridge with the control point. I'm gonna describe the control point a bit better when I get closer to it. Over here, anything else? Keep this doorway clear. Here's some gardening equipment. Also, we have paint, a watering thing, pitchfork or something. Not exactly gardening, more farm equipment, I guess. More barrels and more buildings and stone and the fence with the barbed wire here. What else? Box. We have this advertisement here. Happy Farmers Cooperative. Trust the best. Alright. Lights. Over here. Patches of vegetation. Barrels. Again, fence and barbed wire. Window. And okay, let's look at the control point here. Capture zone, we have this block thing that I never know what's the purpose of it. Exactly like, not game design wise, but like in lore and stuff. If there was something like this in real life, what's the purpose of it, But anyway, in here, the proper control point, we see this yellow-black detail here, communicating delimiting an area. Inside we have a metal disc with light emanating from the center and creating some sort of hologram. It changes colors and the hologram based on within the gameplay, right? Over there we have red, grey, gravel coal, Jenkins, blue industries, a bunch of company names, corn, corn, I think it's a company name, Red Valley. What else? Down here we can go under the bridge, another pickup, health one, light, more patches of grass and vegetation, a bunch of it here, right? Here the ground is pretty sandy, desert-like, right? Orange desert-like. What else? Their map is symmetrical, so I just wanted to finish looking at one side of it before going to the other one, and kind of glossing over, just looking for something different. This one is made out of bricks. I guess I haven't gone here yet. Hay block here. Trespassers will be violated. Warning, no trespassing. A wooden wheel, red bread. A bunch of stuff that I have already described before. Small house thing here. Apparently this is a bathroom house. A little heart on the door. Yeah, we have a sink inside, so yeah, this is the bathroom basically. Here's my box, doors, red bricks. This one I think are blocks of concrete for this part of the structure. Then we have this platform here also, I guess I didn't mention that yet. What else? Crates, tires. Yeah, we have been here before. And if I go here, is there anything that I haven't seen or described? No, I have been already here. Over here also, I guess I might as well mention this metal plates things tied to the structure. I think that's it for the red side of the map. Yeah, and since the map is symmetrical now, let's just look for differences. But we can already say one, right? It's that the buildings over there are mostly in shades of red, brown stuff. These ones are more about blue, gray, sometimes white. Although there is white on both maps, both sides of the map. But anyway, yeah, and over here, blue corn, I imagine. Everything here, mostly the differences is on the materials and colors, right? These ones are metal plates, the other was, I think, wood, right? Yeah, let's check real quick. I think it's wood, yeah, okay. This one is made out of wood, that one metal plates. So let's just look for anything else. That's different. Here we also see a bathroom house with a sink inside, the little heart on the symbol. I didn't mention this previously, but not much new, right? Wooden platform, barrel, tire. Anything else? Blue Industries Incorporated, here shades of blue. Wet paint, I don't remember if there was that on the other side of the map. A paint can and paintbrush. We have this metal plates here, I guess. But mostly high voltage. Industrial was the best. But things are mostly the same, right? Just on the details we see some differences. Warning, toxic chemicals. Don't worry, I got the mask for it. But mostly things are the same. As I said, the map symmetrical. If you play this game, you know that. And other difference that I might find, again, the fluid container. Over here also the controls and stuff. Rocks, I guess, also. Fences. What else? I guess this part was made with tiles. I don't think there were on the other side of the map. That's cool, I guess. Truck again. Yeah, okay, another bridge over there, stuff that's similar. Now the only thing missing for me, just to make this a complete critique, description, is for me to check inside the blue team spawn. And yeah, as we can expect, things are mostly the same, including this part. Yeah, okay. So I'm just gonna go for the red team because I like red. Okay, so I think that's a good enough description. Talked mostly about, we're basically in some sort of place with a bunch of buildings, probably a workplace environment and something industrial, considering stuff like this, right? The valves, the gas container, and a bunch of pipes, and all the signs, warning, high pressure, and all that stuff. So yeah, and there's all the buildings. We could kind of try to figure out restricted area, authorized personnel. We could kind of try to figure out what exactly is being produced here, but extracted, you know, if it's oil or something. But I think that's a bit too far for our purposes. 100% milk fresh. You can do that if you want, but for the art critique I'm gonna stop here. Just on what I see, and you can leave the fun theories for the lore of the game for, I don't know, a forum discussion or something. Anyway, also some sirens there. Let's move on to the next part of the step of the art critique, the analysis. For the elements of art, there are, most authors talk about 7, some consider 8. The common 7 are lines, shapes, forms, space, texture, color, and value. And some authors add points to that, and I'm going to follow those authors because I think it makes more sense. I don't know how I would do an art critique on, for example, post-impressionism, pointillist art that involves the technique of pointillism. I don't know how I would gloss over points if I were to do an art critique over stuff like that. So that's why I chose to add points over on the analysis that I make. So yeah, and there is no order. I can choose whichever element I want first. So let's begin with points, since it might as well. So we have stuff like this ones on the ground, right? Which looks like splashes of paint. So it kinda tying also to the textures here. What else? Let's see. We could kinda... Can we make out some points here? Maybe, but again, tying well to the textures. I'm gonna get to textures, but it's basically the appearances of surfaces of objects. Stuff like here. Also, in this case, it could be... Yeah, also texture in this case. Bunch. If I'm gonna... I might as well still talk a little bit about the points. In this case, they are white and varying in... with some variance between them. And sparsely scattered, not a pattern around them, and basically on the floor, right? And as I said, tying to the texture of the paint on the ground. Over here, these ones are basically what? Gray. Tying to the, again, the texture here of the imperfections of the blocks here of concrete or something, whatever material this is. Similar logic for like this one, for example. Okay, that's kind of screwed things up. But yeah, if the ones on the surface, it's not exactly easy to make out points here, right? But you can kinda do it. At least I think I can kinda make out some, and they are again mostly this time it's like either they're black or grayish, but mostly I think they're mostly like a part or complementing the textures. Let's see here. Any other example of points here? Again, that idea of the textures. Points vary commonly in art. You see it being used to complement textures. So, I don't know always, as I mentioned. Look at pointillism. Look at Opus 247, I think it was the name, from Paul Sinak. So that's a strong exception, because there everything is made out of points, you know, pointillism. But yeah, in other artworks, it's pretty common you see points complementing textures. Over here also, again, much like on the floor back there, these ones are mostly white, varying in size, and let's say, and mostly complementing the texture of the paint, right? By the way, if I'm talking about sizes of points, when does a point stop being a point and becomes a ball? I think that's kind of subjective, honestly. but I try to use my intuition to establish the threshold, let's say. I don't know. Other art critics have their own thresholds. I'm gonna have to establish mine here because otherwise every point is just a very tiny circle. But that's not how I do art critics. At least that's not the theory that I follow, at least. Also, fire extinguisher. I didn't describe this back then, but anyway. Again, on the textures, black this time for the textures. Any other examples? Same deal here. Here we have some white ones and black ones, but again, texture. I think that's mostly gonna be it. And fine. And again, here on the ground, yeah, again, if I can make out some points, there are mostly complementing textures or being a part of the textures. In this case, black or just I don't know. In this case, many stuff here. I'm seeing like negative space, believing it's a point. Sometimes I think that can happen. I don't know. Yeah. In any case, the point here is that I think it makes more sense to think about the textures because the points are being mostly complementing with the textures. We don't see, there's a lot of textures here. Also work on textures. For example, an exception to this. No, even on this sign, there's a dot here. Yeah, I think Fortescue has a lot of textures. Everything work on textures, visually speaking, artistically speaking. Again, here paint. So not sure we're gonna easily find a space without textures that we could use to talk about points there. Yeah, up here also again textures of the like these ones, textures of the fracture, the structure. Fracture structure or something. That sounds like an awesome band name or something. Fracture structure. Anyway, I also didn't mention this before, I guess. Hose and tap. Yeah, I don't think I see any other example of points for me to talk about. Here again, would you look at that? Again, tying well to the appearance of the surface of the wood. This case a bit less, right, I guess. This case a bit less. Okay, so this I think is a good example. This texture is stronger on the way the paint has faded, and we have like this thing here. Which we could look at it as a very small circle again. But yeah, I don't know. But even then, look at it closely, I think I can make out some details of it. That kind of makes it like a whole. So even then, I think still about texture. Look at it a bit more. Yeah, okay. I guess there are some ones here also. Yeah, so that's my take on the points here. Mostly complementing textures. A lot of variety on their sizes and uses of black, white, gray points. I think that's it. Let's talk about lines now. So for lines, I think there's some similar logic here, but in this case it would not be about the textures. I think it would be tied more to the forms of the objects here on the map. So for example, this kind of line here, I think it's actually communicating or helping to showcase the form of the wooden plank. But that's not the only example of it. And we also gotta be careful with stuff like this. Is there a line here? Because there's like the surface to the right. There is the surface here to the right. And this one to the left. Okay. And this one to the left, right? But is there a line in between? When I talk about this kind of examples, I mentioned the idea of ask yourself how thick is the line. In this case, as I see it, it would be infinite. It would be so thin that I see that it has no lines here. I think that's the case simply. Just a little didactic example here, I guess. But anyway, so no lines on this part, for example, and that's pretty common for Team Fortress 2 arts. Here we see this line. And I might as well talk about the lines that we saw. For example, these ones here are mostly have some very irregular thickness to them, and mostly straight, not perfectly straight, but mostly straight. Here, not sure there is a line. I think it's just an effect of the contrast between the two parts, and there is some use of shadows, I think. Here maybe there are some lines, and again straight, this time more regular, curvature to them. Sorry, thickness and thickness. A curvature also, because they're straight, but this time the thickness is more regular, as I see it. Okay, what else? I already talked about lines on the ground, but mostly conveying how tying to the farms, I would say. This one's a bit of the texture, because I think it talks a little bit about the rough surface of this part of the block. What else? What about this grate here? No lines on this part, I think. A lot of use of shadow also. And yeah, it's either shadows or farms here. Yeah, actually, mostly shadows or farms. What else for lines? And like I was looking at a lot of details, but in the whole I see a lack of texture. For not look, sorry, a lack of lines. Like this example that I mentioned is kind of the norm, and we only see lines basically on the details and stuff. So usually for texture, again, another example here, we can kind of make out the two sizes because this one is bright, this one is darker. What else? Again, details of the texture, our farms. Here, don't think there is any. Just, yeah. Yeah, so that's my analysis on lines, I think. Over here, the blocks, again, no lines, right? Yeah, again, no lines, yeah. So, general lack of lines. This one, I think it's thick enough to be a shape, honestly. What else? Yeah, on the barrel. Are there some lines here on the barrel? Maybe. Let me look at a different angle. Yeah, kinda. But again, very closely tied to the forms of the barrel this time, and or the texture of it. So yeah, lines are mostly complementing other elements of art here. But as I mentioned, the ones I saw were mostly straight lined. Okay, I guess the barrel has some more curvy lines. But even then, the curvature depends on the angle, obviously, that we look at it. But I don't know. Again, considering the creator's presentation, in this case, these angles are more common than this angle. Oops. Then, can I do this? Please, can I do this? Okay, finally. So, yeah, no matter the angle, it's very hard to see the curvature. It's way easier to see more straightness on some angles. And when I talk about presentation, that kind of gets a bit into game design, right? So like when we go do stuff, get inside, get atop the staircase and stuff, this angle is way easier to see and common. So for the gameplay of this game, right? What else? But yeah. Here I think, by the way, these are just shapes. I think these are three-dimensional enough for me to just... Sorry, forms. I think these are three-dimensional enough for me to just consider them as forms. Anyway. But yeah, so the lines that I saw, mostly straight lines. Some had irregular thickness, some had more regular thickness to them. And they were all, I think, black. I think on the barrel there was a different color. In here, no, maybe gray. They were either black, gray. On the barrel, I think gray also. It's kind of hard to make out because there is also some sort of red that I don't know if if the line is what's red or a part of the another part of it. Yeah, okay, so maybe a bit of the red, but mostly gray and black. So that's my analysis on the lines. Let's talk about shapes now. Stuff you get when you, for example, enclose a space with a line. Three basic ones are circles, squares, and triangles. Not the only ones, but still. So yeah. So shapes here. That's my analysis. A lot of rectangular shapes. Just look at it through this angle, for example. And rectangular. And shapes are always two-dimensional, by the way. So for example, this barrel has a rectangular shape right now. Looking at it through this angle. Through this one is an oblong shape, because oblong is basically this smush bag thing, or you can think it. Somebody got something in the server. Or you can think of it as a rectangle with smoothed out edges, stuff like that. So that's an oblong on this angle. On this one is a rectangle. What else? For shapes, a lot of squarish rectangular shapes as I see it. Here, not exactly a rectangle because it has like this arc, but still. What else? Cylinders, rectangles, and oblongs. Oblong shapes. I guess here we have an arrow sign, the shape of an arrow. Again, oblong shape for the fluid container. A lot of thin shapes for the tubes, either oblong or rectangular ones. Yeah. Although it's not fair to call this a rectangle, right? It would be. It's a pipe shape because it has the junction part. What else? Again, here some oblong or half oblong or half. This is a unique shape because of the part here in the middle, but still have some similarities to rectangles and oblong shapes. What else? Barrels. The rocks have some unique shapes to them. They're like blobs or something. The buildings again. Also. Can I get a good example? If you see boxes and crates, it's very easy for you to find also hexagonal shapes. I just want to find a good example. Okay, like this one. Over here, if you look far enough, a square, right, through this angle. If you look closer, depending on how you look, here, rectangle. But like from this angle, it's a hexagon, not a regular hexagon, but still it has like it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6-sided polygon, a hexagon. So yeah, on crates we see that. And what else? More unique blob things for the rocks. When we look at the roofs of the buildings, that gives trapezoidal shapes. So often, not always, but when we see like the sloped roof, that would mean a trapezoidal shape. So I see that also on a number of them, not always, because over here, for example, there's a rooster over there thing. Over here, for example, there's not on this building there are not like sloped roofs, but then there are some here. Over here on that part, no sloped roofs, but there are some. These two here, another one here. So in the center of the map, there are more trapezoidal shapes. What else? A bunch of square rectangles and hexagons again. Also oblong shapes from the barrels, depending on the angle. What else? Blobs for the rocks, and the rest of the map symmetrical. So yeah, I think that's mostly it for my analysis on the shapes here. A lot of geometrical forms. So again, haystack. Not a perfect one, but kind of hexagonal shape with smooth edges, right? With slightly smooth edges. Yeah. There's also the pickups. The demo box has again rectangular, square, and in this case often hexagonal shapes. And the small health pack, this pew shape, has like its unique shape. Not sure you can easily describe it with something geometrical. So yeah. Any other noticeable exception here? Not sure. Also, don't be fooled. These are not squares, because this is the empty space between the, for the fence. The fence itself is the shapes that we should be looking for. And this guys here it's kind of a mesh, right? But that's not exact. As far as shapes would go, I think we could talk about the very thin shapes of it that make a mesh. So let's add that to my analysis here. So number of meshes and stuff like that for the fences, because there's some fences, right? Another one over there, stuff like it. Also, I guess we can kind of make out rectangular shapes on walls like this one. What else? I think that's good enough for shapes, honestly. Pretty extensive analysis. Let's talk about forms now, which is stuff that's always three-dimensional. And by the way, this health pack has more geometrical shapes, I guess. So forms are always three-dimensional. You can think of depth, for example, also height and width, but depth is very important for three-dimensionality. And so what's my analysis on the shapes of this map? A lot of blocky shapes, I would say, from these support beams of things. Here also an elongated block for the locker and the crates. Cylindrical form for the barrels this time. Also pipe forms for the pipes, I guess. What else? Again, a lot of these blocky forms for the buildings. And since I'm talking about the buildings already, when we get to and now what were trapezoidal shapes. In here they are kind of prismatic forms, as we say. So prisms are three-dimensional. Trapezoidal shapes are two-dimensional. So prismatic forms. And what else? The rocks again have something that differs from the rest of the buildings. Now when it comes to forms. Again, like they have unique forms for them. Rock forms, let's say. So yeah. Unique forms for them. I mentioned before the three-dimensionality of this thing here, so again it's kind of a chain link fence thing, right? So that's it's like a fence it has the forms of a fence, the very of a sort of intertwined thing. So yeah, we can only make that out, especially because we can notice how flat it kind of is. To differentiate it from simply what we said for shapes. So yeah, the flatness I think matters more for the forms here. So what else? By the way, the appearance on the wall, that's the part where we are only looking at this as art, because there is texture on the wall, even though if you go like here to the side of it, we can't interact with it, and it kinda can look like something that's supposed to be perfectly flat, but that this thing here visually has some kind of forms, you know. It has some kind of blocky forms protruding from the wall. For our purposes, there is a farm here. This is not perfectly flat. This is a farms of a bunch of bricks on top of each other. The farm of a bunch of bricks on top of each other. What else? Here a little bit, but it's more on the cavings on the wall. Could tie better to textures also. I'm also going to talk about textures for the brick wall, by the way, but we're gonna get there. What else? Right, bunch of the stair has their own farms here with the bunch of planks for the steps of the staircase, right, and flatness around. Considering the farms that I mentioned, flatness is pretty strong, right? The only exception would be on the cylindrical farms of the barrels, but flatness is pretty strong here, even on the pickups. Again, exception on the small health pack, but the medium one is a bit more flat, has more flatness to it. I guess the cones are another kind of exception. What else? And the hologram, again, a bunch of flats this time. This is I think this is another prism, in this case. It's like a three-dimensional pizza triangle thing. I think we also call this a prism. Both this and the prismatic forms of the buildings with sloped roofs. And we have this very thin disc here for the metal part here. What time is it? Okay. What else? For farms, I think that's it. Again, flatness on this metal sheet thing. And more the other stuff I have mostly described already for farms. I guess the vegetation has this like very, very thin grassy farms, I guess. Even like this vegetation, it follows a bit of that idea, which I think it's not exactly grass, but still. Well, this one at least. This one is a bit more elaborate, right? But anyway. I think that's it for farms. A lot of flatness, prismatic farms, cubic farms, blocky farms, and a number of cylindrical ones, and a lot of flatness. Yeah, and also the rocks with their own farms and stuff. Even these big ones. So okay, that's it for farms. Let's talk about space. So let's. Okay, let's go to the rickety, I guess. Just to do things more in an easier way, I guess. Can I? Yeah, okay. So for the use of space here. Pretty abundant here, right? We have this whole open room, empty room. A bit tighter, for example, here under the stairs. But still, over here again, pretty generous use of space. Over there is downright vastness, the whole vastness of it. And what else? Again, tighter use under this elevation thing. And I guess in between the barrels, if we're gonna really be nitpicky about it. Also here under the gas container, fluid container. So a lot of, again here, a lot of tightness on the details. There's often tightness on the details, the barrels, the props, the things on the walls. In here, like a more moderate use of space, not as generous, but not as tight either. Here, but there's a lot of openness, right? A lot of openness. Sometimes there's downright vastness, and here just there's a lot of generosity. Here, again, visually speaking, of course, visually speaking, because gameplay-wise, game design-wise, not all of this space that I mentioned is really that open. Here we have gameplay-wise, this is a bit tighter, way tighter than here, right? Considerably. But visually, I think they are all in general like generals, open and stuff. So you can really kind of make out well the distances. They're visually generous. An exception to the details. On the details, they're a bit tighter. In this, there is no space between the piles of tires. Inside there is inside the tires there is the somewhat tight space there naturally. I guess between these parts of the wooden platform. So yeah. That's mostly it. Also over there on the distance, vastness, and I guess on the sky itself. So I guess that's mostly it. A lot of generous use of space, tighter on the details, and with points of vastness and great open space on, especially on the outsides of the map, if we're talking about presentation game design. And I guess the sky, we are outdoors basically. So I guess that's my analysis on the use of space. Let's talk about now texture. Finally texture. I mentioned it a couple of times now. So yeah, appearances of the surfaces of objects, and I have showcased a lot of them, right? But for a proper analysis focusing just on the textures, let's see here. Vocabulary helps a lot with that, by the way. So here on the ground, on this part of the wooden planks, it mostly refers to the, as I said before, imperfections on the planks. Of that we can kinda make out. That's kind of what we can make out. It would be a woody texture, you know, resembles the nature of wood. You can say that. You can even write stories with that if you're talking about textures. On these block things, on these support parts, there are more dirty textures, I would say, and faded textures here on the parts where there's paint. And finally on the red bricks, there's like protruding textures, basically. A lot of it's like, you know, a bunch of protruding textures. On this wooden crate, I think it's mostly, I don't know, it's mostly the paint here being kind of faded, I guess, again. On the barrels, again, faded textures for paint. Over on this part, kind of rough textures again for imperfections on the material. What else? I'm not gonna consider this thing as a texture, because I could, but I'm not going to, since I only added it for gameplay, much like I'm not considering the characters inside this map as a part of the critique here, because we could be critiquing this in the middle of the game, but anyway. What else? Again, faded textures for the paint, and I said before there's some caved textures, right, in this case, which is a bit different from the roughness, but also I think communicate a bit of the imperfections of the material. What else? Again, faded paint. Here on the ground, a bit of dirty textures for what the tracks, you know, something like that. Here, again, faded paint. I remember what I said for points, so in this case it would be kind of a splattered texture, I guess. a bit, although there's also the faded parts of it over here also. So yeah. And this would be an example of negative space. Is there a point here or a shape here? I think not. There's just like the red around, but through negative space, possibly we could make out that. So be careful, because for us we gotta be careful because we're gonna talk. Space is a different element, right? So yeah, you gotta be careful with that. What else? Ah, on the rocks. On the rocks, it's again some sort of rough texture here, a rough and dirty texture, I would say. What else? Tooling texture, faded texture here again. Watch your step. Something faded also in this case, and woody textures on this part. But we are repeating ourselves basically here, right? So we're just gonna on the ground. Again, this is like a sandy texture, very granulated, very granulated texture, sandy. You know, what else here? Again with the faded paint thing. There are these cracks on the ground, so some sort of cracked texture here, which is different from what we have seen before. I think we also see it here. So interesting to notice that, different, especially because it's on the control point, again with the faded paint. And let's just look at the blue side of the map, because the textures change a bit, ought to change a bit here, right? Although not by much, even though this is not made out of wood this time, we can still see either paint faded or imperfections of the material. Here paint, it's either one of those for the most part. Also here I guess on the tire. And what else? Cave textures again. What about here? Yeah, here more of the same. And the rocks have the same textures as the other side, yep. And over here, yeah, more of on the tiles, anything new? No. Again, not exactly caved, I mean a bit here, but more of a rough texture again to talk about the imperfections. So that's mostly it, right? Textures is often tied to the imperfections or degradation of the materials in one way, with the paint, with the roughness and stuff. Very closely tied to all of that, especially on the buildings, and the exception on the ground and the rocks, which are more tied to what you would expect there, I guess. And finally we see some sort of cracked textures. We see cracked textures on the bridge of the control point. Very interesting. Anything else for my analysis on textures? I guess that's most. And protruding ones also on the bricks, but I guess that's mostly it. Also, something that I often talk about for Team Fortress 2 textures. What is our favorite texture you have seen Team Fortress 2? That's a cool question. I see many of textures like this and others on the walls and stuff. Let me think for a second. I don't know, I guess I like the faded paint, especially depending on where they use it. When they do it like comically, they have the wet paint here thing. Warning, unsafe structure. Yeah, a bit of this, like it's unsafe. No kidding, the whole thing is like the sign itself is breaking apart. And we see a little bit of that also here, right, with the sign. Wet paint, yeah. A little bit less about texture here, but more about points and shapes, but still. Don't know if there was another one with another map more texture like, but anyway, yeah. And finally, I was just going to say that I think the textures communicate a degree of realism. That's something that I often say for Team Fortress 2 maps. So, and I think that also goes here. Realism is being conveyed to me. So that's it for textures. Let's talk about now of color. And you're already thinking something if you play this game, red and blue, Team Fortress 2, yep. But the map is not only red and blue, so let's talk about that. Let's first go to the red side of the map, but we can already talk about gray and brown, for example, white here. But let's do things in this way. Okay, so first here on the spawn. A lot of light red from the bricks on the walls, I guess also red on the company logo. But alongside that, there is a degree of, I think this is gray, on the pillars and a shade of brown on the ground. I think this is a shade of brown. Anyway, so there's all of that, and also a lot of details with different ones. For example, the air vents are white, but anyway, let's try to broad stroke it, let's say, because I can't focus on every single thing. Over here, a lot of, there is again shades of red and brown, because of the brownish red, stuff like that. And white here, I guess the blue of the sky, let's not forget that. Also gray on the ground again, and a lot of that. In here, for example, there is more white on the walls, gray thing here. On this part, again more gray on the ground, and now we have a shade of orange for this desert part, right? Interesting. And then some sort of reddish color for the rocks. Over here, again, gray ground, and what else? More white on the details of the pipes, a bunch of gray down there, many details, and some white also. And also still brown on the wooden details, as we could expect. In here, again, so now things I think get a bit more varied, because not all parts are red here, so this is like a shade of white, alongside the brown that we have seen before and stuff. I guess this berry is yellow also, even though that's a detail. Again, now there is also white on this part, and then red, and then white, so a bit more variety. Brown on these wooden parts. Here inside, again, shades of white, brown, red. So there's like a mixture of those things, right? Because of the materials, basically, because things are made out of wood and stuff. So that's interesting to notice, at least I think so. Over here, again, more of that. Browns, especially brown, and I think this is a very light brown. Shades of brown, is it? Maybe not actually. Not sure exactly here. Maybe it's a shade of gray, perhaps. I know the ground here is a bit gray, and the red on the walls. What else? Yeah, okay. So here on this more brighter part, this is either I think it's a shade of gray, somewhat. I don't know exactly, honestly. I'm gonna be honest. But whatever, it's a detail. A lot of brown here on the ground, with some reddish details, to be fair. And here on the control point, a lot of gray, white walls here. On the many parts of it, although with some orange on the middle of it, that I guess we could tie to the desert part, right? Here again, desert. Don't let the shadows fool you. Be careful, we're gonna talk about that in a moment. And what else? And yeah, mostly that. And here on the blue side, as you could expect, things are more blue. There's a shade of light blue here on the walls. Although we still see a lot of brown. Interesting, right? So what else? We're here, white again. Gray here. And blue and white this time. Although we still see the orange on the ground and the reddish color of the rocks. And what else? Here inside, yeah, more of the light blue, although with also some gray. Although I'm repeating myself a lot here, right? I'm basically, even though I talk about different parts, I'm always repeating the same set of colors, you know? So that should tell us something. Here, white and blue. A bunch of white and blue here, but still with the... I don't know, some orange, red for that kind of rock, I guess. And yeah, and let's just look inside looting spawn real quick, just in case. Yeah, and much like on the outside, blue and white is pretty predominant with details in gray and brown. So I just, okay, I mentioned a lot of colors for a lot of things now, so let's try to make a little bit of sense of all of that. Well, let's start with the easy part, right? There is that presence of red on many parts of the one side of the map and blue on the other, so you know, let's use a little bit of the game design of the game here and talk about that. Although, as I mentioned, there is no red whatsoever here, because we still have these reddish rocks, but you know, still there's some predominance of red and blue on different sides. Alongside that, there is a lot of gray, brown and white on many parts, right, spread all over for both sides. Brown because of the many wooden parts, and gray and white depending on where you look at. Usually like white on the bricks of the buildings, but some are gray also, and gray also for many metallic parts and the bridge itself. So so many brown, gray and white spread all over on both sides of the map, and on the center of the map the bridge is mostly gray, and we see a lot of the orange of the ground around it. So I think that's how I'm going to try to make sense of all of this, try to, let's say, categorize where the colors are more. So categorize and try to understand how the colors, where the colors were used here. And yeah, and even at the center of the map there is still white, gray and brown, right? But I guess it just caught my attention that there is a lot of orange around and gray on the bridge. So just to recap, a lot of red on the red side and blue on the blue side, a lot of brown, gray and white spread all over, and gray on the middle of the map, and also orange there. Orange notably in the middle of the map. We have, not sure if we have any orange on the spawn rooms. We kind of have this reddish orange on the rocks, I guess. So, and finally I didn't mention, but this sky's blue. That matters less again because of the game design, the creator's presentation. When we play this game, we less often look at the sky, so that's why I'm considering that I'm placing less importance on it, let's say, even though it's still there, still matters a bit. And finally, the last element of art that's missing here for me to analyze is value, which is all about light and darkness, brightness and shadiness. And so, for example, here we can kind of see that this block is creating a shadow, and we can kind of see where the shadow ends and the light of the sun begins again. And here again we can kind of make out the shape of the building because of its shadow and the angle that it's blocking the sun. Also, we see these lights here, emanating light, that's all of that. So, but we're not just looking at is there a light here or is there a okay, we're kind of looking at that also, but there doesn't need to be a literal lamp light or literally the sun for there to be light and darkness in a work of art. So when that's the case, it's simply like there's not a source of light within the frame of the picture, for example, you know. It's just that in Team Fortress 3 it's easy because there are many lights and the sun often, so anyway. But for my analysis of value here, let's see. So here we have like this bright bright area, and then it's a bit shadier after it, but then we have more brighter areas because again of the lamp lights. So there's a lot of that. Over here again a lot of lamp lights giving us like illuminated areas in the middle of shadier ones. It's interesting to see that this part's a bit shadier, even though there is this part being illuminated, but that's because of the building, right, in essence. Here again brighter shadier part altercating with brightness. And what else? Again brighter shadier part here. Very expensive shadier part here, right? And here are more patches of more illuminated areas. And here again, and once again shadiness here. So you see a lot of altercation between like these shady parts and bright parts. And what else? And finally, when we get over here, you see on the middle of the map, I think there is more predominance of brightness, depending on the part of the map. On this one, there is like the shadier part. We have the shades underneath the bridge. This part's shadier. Yeah. So on the right side of the map, things seems to be a bit brighter. There seems to be less shadows, but there is still a bit. For example, here. So that kind of helps us notice the angle of the source of light, in this case the sun, supposedly. Where are you, sun? We can kind of see, supposedly the sun should be over there somewhere. Although I don't think I see the sun anywhere. Some maps you can actually see the sun. But I don't think I can find the sun here. Even considering the shadows. Yeah, okay. Kind of annoying. Unless... No, okay. I guess we can kind of see the... Not sure if that's like this light, that brighter part is the sun behind the hills or something. Well, anyway, okay. We don't need to find the actual sun to talk about the value here on the map, because it would be nice, but oh well. In any case, yeah. So the consequence of all of that is, as I said, a little bit more brightness on the right side, whoops, and a bit shadier, a bit more shadows on the blue side. And when we go deeper into blues territory, yeah, again this some generous area of shadiness, but still altercating with brighter areas. And here inside again, okay, so this is an interesting part, because through these shadows you can actually see the shapes of the windows. I don't think we have that on the right side. And here again, altercation between brighter parts, shadier parts. Yeah. And just to make this complete, on the blue team's spawn. Again, a bit brighter here, a bit shadier on the corners, for example. And a bit less noticeable brightness on the ground. But still, we still have that in common, and the rest in common, as I mentioned. I just want to see if the red side has those window shapes, because I thought that was unique. And let's see here. Yeah, here on the red side, considering the angle of the sun, we don't see the shapes of the windows. So that's cool. Okay, so that was like me describing where I see the shades and the light and stuff, but I also think I have more to say. I would also like to mention that the shady parts are in general mild. In other words, even though I'm technically in the shades, I can still make out the details of stuff around me, you know, even on the ground and stuff. So it's not pitch black here, basically. Makes sense in considering the game design of the map, because it's daytime basically. but it's important for our purposes. There is to talk about the use of value here. Yeah, like we can see the details on the wood even when we are in the shadows. So mild shadows. Although I wouldn't say the brightness is that strong, because something very bright would be if we look literally at the light, right? So those are like spots with very intense brightness, but other than that, we don't see much of it. And in case you would like an example of what it would look like if there was intense brightness on the ground and the surfaces, you can think of the top of snowy mountains. In real life, you know, mountains with snow, because the sunlight reflects so brightly that you have to actually use sunglasses. It's recommended. So that would be an example of intense brightness on a surface, not necessarily directly from a source of light. But yeah, so mild shades and mild brightness, I guess. And what else? And I guess I would also like to mention how we often see the shapes of the buildings through the shadows. That's something that I said before for Team Fortress 2 maps. And so that means that we see a care for realism and stuff, also considering the angle of the light is apparently consistent throughout the whole map. Very easy for example, a novice artist to give out conflicting sources of light. Sometimes it happens, but in this case, I think it seems to me that they didn't make that mistake, or didn't do anything like that, you know. I'm not sure you could do something like that for style, but you have to have a very bright idea. I don't know. I think, but anyway, yeah. And here is a good example of it, how I see the shades communicating the shapes of the things. Very cool. And yeah, so some care for realism on the use of value. So yeah. To recap, mild brightness and shadiness, and realism for use of value. And that's it for the elements of art. Now it's the time for the interpretation step of the art critique. So I'm going to interpret the creative vision behind it. What was the artist envisioning, or artists envisioning when they were to create this? So first things first, let's begin with the basics, right? The obvious. We are inside the game Team Fortress 2. We're basically this is in the game. We can play on this map inside of the game and all that stuff. So I think one important part of the creative vision, as always, for my stream, was for this map to be part of the game Team Fortress 2. You can like rephrase it something like to make a capture the flag. Oh, sorry, to make a King of the Hill map for Team Fortress 2. You know, so I think that was one important idea side of the creative vision here. Very important for us to have that also, even if it sounds obvious. Because if we leave that out, then we get to stuff like the pickups and the map, for example. If we would critique them in separate, then they would not have a similarity, and that's just not how things go, game design wise. In other words, the pickups were designed with the map in mind, and vice versa, in one way or another. So, you know, it would be irresponsible of me to, as an art critic, to leave that out. But anyway, so yeah. One idea, make a King of the Hill map for Team Fortress 2. Okay, what else? And also we could talk about stuff from the description analysis, right? The idea of having a blue side and a red side, you know, that ties to Team Fortress 2 game design. And the idea of a control point, as I mentioned in the description. Anyway, what else for my interpretation of the creative vision here? So this is common for Team Fortress 2 maps, but not all of them have so many buildings and stuff. A number of them do, but not all of them. You can think, for example, Payload Badwater, where on the first part of the map there are basically no, like just the spawn and the other building at the very end of the, right next to the control point. And then there's like one building that with a lot of space inside, and after that, you know, it's very pretty common for there to have buildings in Team Fortress 2. But anyway, I interpret that the idea of all these buildings, with this architecture specifically, with all these sloped roofs and you know, trapezoidal shapes, prismatic farms and all that, I think that was an important part of the creative vision for this map. For many others also, but not all of them, as I just mentioned, as I just said. So that's another side of the creative vision here, the buildings, the presence of them, predominance of them, how many are there with this set of architecture. What else? We have stuff like the name of the map, right? Highpass. So considering the name of the map and also stuff like well, we described there is a bridge in the middle of the map, and it's pretty noticeable for the predominance of gray in it, as I was analyzing the colors of it. And also the texture is kind of unique. This cracked texture here is something that we only see on the bridge. So because of all that, I'm interpreting that the idea of the bridge, a bridge, was third idea here, was important for the creative vision. So the bridge should be noticeable, memorable, important for the creative vision of this map. And indeed, we can also just talk about simple stuff like, oh, the control point is on the bridge, yeah, for example. But we're gonna talk a little bit more about that on when I talk about the principles of art. But anyway, so bridge, the buildings, as I said, to make a King of the Hill map for Team Fortress 2. What else I would interpret was part of the important for the creative vision here? Because technically it's possible that this hay block was a part of the creative vision, but I'm just gonna focus on what I think was most important here. You know, it's possible that they were thinking about this map, envision the map and envision like, oh, and on this part we can use the hay block model or something. I don't know, maybe that was a part of their vision, but I'm just focusing on what I find most important, predominant. Anyway, as I interpret. What else? King of the Hill map, all these buildings, the bridge, Highpass. I guess we could also mention that it's like Highpass. Also, we could mention the slopes here. I didn't kind of mention this, but technically this there is some smooth slopes going up, right? Basically, the farms here are like slopey, and it brings us to this bridge, and also to the other. If we don't take the slopes, we kind of have to take stairs or ramps. So also considering the name and the farms here, I suppose, I guess this idea of a elevated spot was also an important part of the creative vision. So it's not high mount, so it's high pass. So you know, I'm kind of separating the word, I guess. When I think high pass, the idea of a bridge, because we pass from one side of the other if you go through a bridge. But to be a high pass, somewhere high, so it's, you know, now this other idea is what I'm getting at through this notion of some sort of altitude, at least for the focal point here, let's say the bridge. So yeah, high pass, Maybe I should talk about that before I mention all the buildings, but I don't know, I guess the buildings called more my attention. I don't know. So yeah, so far we have King of the Hill map for TF2, all the buildings, trapezoid, all these buildings with this architecture, to be a bridge in some sort of high place, and anything else that I would interpret for the creative vision here. I could add more stuff, for example, like, oh, the fact that it's daytime, but I think that was not that important. Maybe I'm gonna interpret that maybe that was added later, possibly. Even though we see the shadows and stuff and they communicate to us the building, I don't think that was very important part of the creative vision, because I don't think that all that stuff is that much noticeable to me. The shades and the daytime, there we can't even see the sun. And yeah, so I guess I'm gonna stop here. Possibly if I were to add more ideas for the creative vision, I would mention that being daytime, but I just don't think it was that important. So anyway, yeah. So the 4 ideas that we're going to consider here for the creative vision that I'm interpreting. King of the Hill map 1442. Map with all these freaking buildings and stuff, with that kind of architecture. For there to be a bridge thing, and for there to be in an elevated place, you know, something that demands you climbing one way or another to get to. So yeah, with all that said, now let's go to the judgment step of the art critique, where I'm going to call this successful or unsuccessful art, and to do that I'm going to base myself on the principles of art, and I'm going to look at this artwork and talk about them here. Where do I see them? How do I see them applied? Basically, the principles are how the elements of art were used, and they are kind of the vehicles for meaning. Let's say one thing that they do is they allow you to carry out meaning. So anyway, they should tell us how well this artwork fit with the creative vision that I interpreted. So first things first, I'm going to consider 6 principles, by the way, because authors don't agree on which ones are there. I'm going to consider movement, unity, emphasis, contrast, balance, and proportion. And again, no, there's no order, but let's begin with movement, which has nothing to do with animations, by the way. The principle of movement is all about how a work of art can kind of move your eyes, guide your eyes around in some sort of path or direction. I think the easiest way to understand this is looking at arrow signs, for example. Do we have one here? Okay, we have one here. The idea is that they kinda move your eyes naturally to the direction they're pointing. Another example that I always mention is the manga Dragon Ball Z from Akira Toriyama, where the panels drawn by the artist naturally move your eyes. One panel moves your eyes to the next one, that one to the next one, that one to the next one. 2 examples of the principle of movement here. So let's see here. So yeah, okay. If we're gonna talk about movement, for example, there is the arrow signs. We have that one. I think there is another one near the spawn. Yeah, and another one here. So those are examples of the principle of movement. But what else? I also see it, for example, on this parts of the structure here, how high they are, and they kind of, to me, guide my eyes through looking at the whole structure and noticing how tall it is. Since the principles are all about how the elements are used, I like to mention which elements were used when I can. So in this case, the shapes, the forms, I think are also helping. The shapes, the forms, the color, being blue at the base of it and then white throughout. I think it also helps a bit to create the movement here visually. What else? texture, I think also kinda, mostly because it's uniform. If there was like different textures in different ways, perhaps it would make it harder for me to see the principle of movement here. But anyway, yeah. But I think more strongly shapes and forms usually. Although, as I said, I think the color and values, color and texture is also helping. Or lack of texture. Okay, maybe it's unfair to say texture because it would be a lack of texture, right? So maybe just color because it's blue at the base and then white throughout. And yeah, because the texture seems to be the same roughly between the bottom part and the other one. So okay, so let's just say shapes, forms, and color. And yeah. And I guess I would also add lines in this case because the lines are straight going upward. I think that also helps. But yeah, okay. Any other examples? And the arrow signs, the shapes basically, and color in contrast, white arrow sign with the blue background. The textures are I see it as actually making it a bit harder to communicate movement here. But anyway. Any other examples of the principle of movement as I see it? A bit here also on this part here, although the like angled shapes I think make it a bit harder to me to see that. Here I think is a good example of the principle of movement, just like guide your eyes to see the whole height of the structure. But anyway, what else? Here interestingly is I think it's interesting that I see the farms here and communicating it a bit to me because of this curvature on both the sides of it and the top part. I think communicates me to, and I guess also a bit of the value being a shadow here. To me, I think it gives off an effect of movement to get inside to make my eyes get inside this place. Basically, look at the end of it. So I think I also see it a bit here. Very interesting with the farms. What else for the principle of movement? I guess a bit with this gray part here, how it's repeated throughout, and to me I kind of see it guiding my eyes laterally to accompany this side of the building. Which I mean, we could tie that with game design, right? Because if you're here, then that is kind of an incentive to go here, in a way, to invade the enemy base maybe. Interesting to think about, to me at least. What else? Any other examples of the principle of movement that I see here? I don't know. In here, look at it through this angle. Both the farms of this downward slope with this other one from the from the bathroom house, they kinda see guiding my eyes to that general direction. So I guess if I'm going here and I go here, I think that's kinda moving my eyes to look left. Again, you can think about game design because that's where the enemies should be, right? So if the slope was inverted, I think it would be harder to see that. To move my eyes in that way. I just wanted to look at the red side. Yeah, okay. I think there is less contrast. No, actually, yeah. I think it's a bit harder for me to make out because of the textures of the red bricks. But I think there is also a little bit of that effect here when it comes to accompanying the extent of the building. Also, there is textures on the support beam thing, so a bit harder to me. I think on the blue side, the principle of movement is stronger there, but I do think I see it a bit here on the red side also. And what else? I already mentioned the arrow signs. Same thing here from the red side. And I don't know. I think these are not like the only ways I see the principle of movement, but I think they are the strongest ones, let's say. The easiest way I see it. So we got basically like the height of the buildings of the spawn. Also this part here under the bridge. And this part here, right? Great thing. On both sides, by the way? Yeah. On both sides, but I think especially on the red side, because here I see more contrast between the white and the gray. On the blue side, a bit less. I think the contrast is not... Being on the shades here, I think makes the contrast harder to notice. Also, these bricks I think are gray, and the other ones are white, so more strongly happening on red side. Interesting. And just out of curiosity, do I still see that over here? Yeah, although and finally on this other part, I think I still see it a bit, moving my eyes to the left. So, okay, so those are the spots where I saw the principle of movement. Does any of that tie to the idea of a King of the Hill map for Team Fortress 2? I think not exactly. Those are like cool stuff, but I don't think they tie it that well to that whole idea. Technically, this thing here is very close to the spawn, but they're not limited to the spawn itself, so we have a bit here on the spawn, and actually like outside of the spawn, it's taller, so I don't see it tying that well with the idea of communicating where the spawn is. It's just like the geometry architecture of the map, but I don't see it tied to Team Fortress 2 mechanics. Here on the bridge, again, funny enough, the control point is on top of the bridge, but if I see the movement to go underneath it, again, the thing is, don't get me wrong, it can help you to win the game if you go to the enemy side of the base, much like here, if you're encouraged to invade the enemy, you know. Then naturally it's all about helping you win the game, but I just don't see it tied to Team Fortress 2 game design specifically. Why couldn't this work for Counter-Strike? Why couldn't this work for any other first-person shooter, you know? I don't see that as iconic for Team Fortress 2, less even for some map or for King of the Hill. Just like, you know, good game design, I would say, but not exactly all about just Team Fortress 2. So, because my interpretation was not just to make a map with good game design. I don't know, maybe that's kind of the goal for every game designer, right? So, anyway, at least that's my take on it. What about the idea of the buildings being something important, memorable for the map and stuff? Especially the trapezoidal ones. Funny here, right? Because the buildings where I see the most of it, which are these ones, and the other ones also, right, they do not have trapezoidal shapes, prismatic farms. Also this one. They are more like blocky simply, right? Have like rectangular, hexagonal shapes, blocky farms, hexagonal shapes. So I guess I don't see that helping with the idea of this trapezoidal shapes, prismatic farms buildings. You know, one thing tied to another. What about the rest? So we have the bridge thing and these pathways that we can take to go here, and also the bridge thing. Okay, to be fair, when we look at it from this angle, this part here, naturally we have a trapezoidal farm and a prismatic shape, that's a part of it, that's helping. So I think in this part's helping communicate a bit it. Okay, so it's getting there on this specific detail. Alright, so it's helping with the creative vision on that side. What about the idea of a bridge? Now I think it's easy, right? Basically, if you just look at what I said for this part here, especially the farms of the bridge here, how they convey at least make my eyes go underneath it, and that makes it easy to notice the bridge itself, the forms of the bridge. Bridges are things that you can go under. If this whole part here was filled with earth, this wouldn't be a bridge at all. So maybe it would still make sense. The map name of Highpass would still make some sense if it was just a road or something, but I don't know, right? Different idea. So, but with being a bridge, I think the geometry here helps notice that it's a bridge. And more importantly, it was a deliberate choice, because if it's something that we can identify with the principles, then by definition, since the principles are how the elements were used, that means that this was done by the creator, and so it was a deliberate choice that ties to the creative vision. So that's basically what we wanted to find out here, that kind of stuff. What else? And finally, the idea of being somewhere high with Highpass, that you either have to take on the slopes or the stairs and ramps to get to. Now it's easy here, right? Because again, through this angle, this is a downward angle, and that's been communicated through movement. It would be an upward angle if we look at it from over here. But through this angle I don't see it that well, honestly. Mostly because I guess if it was pointing somewhere, it would point at inside of that hole instead of pointing at a general area. So I don't know. But I guess the important part here is whether or not there is some sort of elevation, and through this angle I see the principle of movement tying very strongly to the elevation that we have here, which is, it's the same one if you're attacking. So of that I think it's easy to tie with the ideas of a high ground, some sort of altitude that you have to reach to get to the control point. After that, so okay, that's the principle of movement. Was tied to the creative vision with the ideas of the buildings, the bridge, and the high place altitude. Okay, let's talk about the principle of unity now. Principle of unity / variance, which is the opposite, but we kind of talk about them together. Unity is about parts of the artwork apparently working together in one way or another. There are many ways to accomplish. You can think like proximity. If those tires are like all stacked on top of each other, so it's kind of like they are together, they are a pile of tires, someone is stockpiling tires there, that kind of stuff. Visually they're working together towards something for the art. We can talk about continuity, is another easy way to accomplish it. So the orange on the ground and the orange on the ground is continuous throughout this whole part here, so a lot of continuity here. Technically it changes, it gets darker because of the shades, right? But anyway, repetition also another way to accomplish unity. You can think of the cracks, they're not all of them together, but they're a similar texture that's being repeated through many parts here of the bridge. Also the textures on the ground also being repeated. Anyway, and variety, which is the opposite of unity, it also matters. Also is a way to accomplish the creative visions if it's deliberate. Stuff like these different forms of vegetation here, different vegetations I guess, and their farms also, but anyway, and all the different stuff that we have is stuff like the hose and the tap, that adds variety. The important part is whether or not any of that ties to the creative vision. And so first, the idea of working with the map 1442, Well, we got a very easy one here, right? Because of the unity of the red and the blue, one side of the map has a lot of repetition on shades of red through many parts of it, and a notable lack of blue. And the other side has a lot of light blue in it, and less red. There's some on the reddish rocks, but I would argue that there is much more blue parts, blue object surfaces than the reddish ones. Also, stuff like these rocks are a bit farther away considering the author's presentation. So all of that ties easily to the game design of red versus blue for Team Fortress 2, the red team versus the blue team. Easy. So very easily tied to the game design of Team Fortress 2. There's the idea of being a king of the hill map. When it comes to Unity, we could talk about variety simply being this metal disc on the ground that emits a hologram. If there's only one of it and it's in the middle of the map, and it adds variety because there's nothing like it on the rest of the map. This is not like attack and defense or capture points, which have many of them, so repetition. So in this case, being only one of its variety, I think also contributes to the idea of the King of the Hill map. Of course, we could talk about if this control point was at the since it's in the middle of there's the fact that it's in the middle of the map that also matters. But not sure it's tied to Unity, so we're gonna talk about that later probably. But anyway, yeah, then the variety of this entity here being a single one, that's again part of the game design, the mechanics of a King of the Hill match. Anyway, what about the other ideas for the creative vision? What about the buildings? Are being an important part of the map? Oh, here is easy, right? Just because of how much repetition there are of their shapes and forms. This kind of building is constantly repeated through the map, very, very often. So easily noticeable by that. Especially on the repetitions of shapes and forms. Because the color changes, right? It's red on one side, or brown, and blue, or gray, or white on the other, and stuff. So, but still, there being so much of them, I think it's making it very noticeable. Anyway, what about the idea of a bridge? Here's interesting, because I mentioned before that in the middle of the map there is the notable gray of the bridge, which is like gray throughout. There are other things that are gray, but the bridge is completely gray, let's say, even though there are details of other colors. But also there is like the cracks texture, which we see only on the bridge. So that kind of pairing of those two elements, it's a way to convey unity. They're working together to communicate some identity, I would say. And we could even talk about the farms, because this curvy farm here underneath that I mentioned for movement is also unique. It's the only of its variety, I think. Okay. There's not like the only curved farm in the whole map, because we have stuff like the barrels. But I guess I'm thinking of the size of it, not just how curved it is, but also the size of it, I think matters to me for the farms here. And all of that, I think, seems to communicate that it's working together, unity, with the idea of making a bridge. The element of space underneath also, yes, being such close proximity, there being space underneath what would be the bridge, what would be this part, I think, communicates the bridge. So, also being vast, some general space underneath the bridge, because if it was just like holes underneath, again, it wouldn't be exactly a bridge. Like if it was like all filled with earth, but there are some holes underneath for some reason, you would expect that There would be some tubes or something, but it wouldn't make sense to call it a bridge, but being general space here. In proximity with the other stuff that I talked about, I think I'll accomplish unity that helps convey the idea that this is a bridge. So helping well with the creative vision here. And what about the idea of something somewhere high and Highpass, the name of the map. Somewhere high with altitude. Let's see. I think this part helps a bit because of the repetition slash continuity of the sloped angles, sloped farms here. Basically, it's slopey, slopey, slopey. It's always slightly slopey, in very close proximity, let's say, until you get to on top of this part here. So that kind of farms, because, and I'm talking especially at here, because over here we climb a bit, but then there's flat. Over here, we climb flat again. If we go here, we go down a bit, and then we get to the bridge. So on this part inside here is a bit it's a bit going on communicating different stuff, I guess. You know, it works. I mean, for the game, it's like we still are on a. We climbed a lot through this ramp, and then that's why we can go down a bit, and we still are on the bridge. Let's say we don't fall. We're not under or under the bridge, let's say, or something like that. But visually, I think this part here with this continuity or slash repetition of sloped farms, I think it's helping a bit convey that. So I got a good angle for it. I guess this is a good enough angle. So yeah, that's how I see that's how I see Unity conveying this idea of altitude or climbing. So yeah, okay, working well for the vision. Let's now talk about the principle of contrast. It's all about differences in the artwork and how they relate and the effect that they bring. So first things first, what about the idea of King of the Hill map 1442? Well, do you see what I see? A bunch of a blue building juxtaposed to a red one over there, red versus blue. Very noticeable contrast, at least to me, between those. Yeah, easy, right? Not all maps have a blue buildings, blue stuff right next to red stuff, but this is case here, so it's very easy to see contrast between those here. Also here on this part. But I'm not sure that would even be the strongest contrast here. Even stuff like the red and the white here, I see contrast. The difference in textures, here we see more horizontal textures and also this part faded, and here's more vertical textures that communicate verticality. There's some contrast here between that. But for example, I see contrast in the colors and the textures of the bridge and the ground around, you know, the orange ground in contrast with the gray bridge, and the shapes and forms of the bridge in comparison to the, you know, the ground. That I see as a strong contrast. And I guess also I see some, because of how tall the buildings are, I think it's very easy to contrast them with the sky, often. Because the sky is blue and there are all the red buildings, I think that work easily. This one is more of a gray building, and so only on the blue buildings it would be a bit harder, but considering that illuminated part, even this one can kind of work. Yeah, so that's where I see some contrast there. And so anyway, those are examples of contrast that I can also see. And okay, so the red blue is already helping with the game design of Team Fortress 2. What about the idea of the buildings? I guess I kind of already just mentioned it, right? But the contrast in this case of color and textures, because all buildings in general have like the textures that we can see from them. Some more easily than others, like the wooden ones I think have the easiest textures to notice, but although this one I also have some. And that contrasting with the sky, which has no texture, you know, maybe the clouds have a bit, but that contrast I see as helping communicate, you know, make us pay attention to the buildings. In practice, achieved through their height, but also producing contrast. That's how I see it, and so, you know, make it easy to notice them and remember them easier. What about the idea of a bridge? Okay, now it's easy, right? Because since there is this contrast in color and textures, forms and shapes between the bridge and the ground, you notice both more easily. And so, since the bridge was a part of the creative vision, I think I think this is helping. If a part of the creative vision was for this to be in a desert, this would also be helping, you know, but I don't think it was that important for this map. I could have added that, but I just don't think it was that important, because there's the ground, there are the rocks, but I just don't think it was that important. There are other maps, like, I don't know, Badwater, but I think that's more important, for example. Cactus Canyon, perhaps. Then release the map. Anyway, but yeah, the contrast here through color, textures, forms and shapes, I think it's helping. Even a bit because of the value, right? Because the bridge casts a shadow underneath, and the other parts here are illuminated, so I think that also helps a bit. And finally, what about the idea of a high ground, high place? Also end of stream time, I hope I don't take too long. What about the idea of high ground, high place? I don't see it helping that much, contrast-wise. Especially because, like, the buildings are tall, but they are like all over the place, and we can't climb them. You know, this is the highest part we can go in the map. But okay, but let's just focus visually. I think I went a bit into game design by accident, more than I should have. Let's see. I don't know. Yeah, I guess, like, no, I guess that's right. I see the problem here. I think it doesn't matter as much that we can't climb the buildings, but to me, visually, what matters more is that there's so many of them, and so I'm not sure I would call. I'm not sure that to me that's conveying, because there's some contrast to their height and the ground, you know, to me. But I don't see that conveying too much the idea of an altitude, because there are so many of them. If there was like one high spot, then I would see that. But being like a bunch of buildings, to me that conveys more ideas of you know, a city or something, you know, or maybe some sort of facility. Either way, like, what would be the focal point of the Highpass would be the center of the map, but it's a bit underneath. It's lower ground than the buildings, right? So I don't see the contrast here helping to convey these notions of a high ground, high place, altitude. Maybe if there was just one tall building on both sides, or one in the middle, like in High Tower, you know, the payload race High Tower, maybe. Although I would have to do a proper art critique on that map. But anyway, but if there were just like one tall building in each side, maybe I think that the contrast there could also communicate altitude. But there being just a bunch of them, I don't see that personally. So yeah, I don't see contrast helping. That idea, just the other three ones. Let's now talk about the principle of emphasis, which is all about there being, you can consider either emphasis, or you can call it dominance, hierarchy, from the school of thought that I follow. Those are all the same. And it's all about there being some sort of dominant focal part of the artwork, something that calls your eyes to it. If movement is about guiding your eyes, emphasis is about keeping your eyes somewhere. And so and especially if we consider hierarchy as the same principle, there are a number of different focuses, sources of emphasis, right? I think, for example, the tall buildings conveyed through the principle of movement, with the help of the principle of movement. By the way, different principles of art often influence and help each other in one way or another. But anyway, so I see, for example, the height of the buildings being one source of emphasis or hierarchy, having some dominance in comparison to the area around them. Over here, this building is not, because again there's a bunch of them around next to each other. But let me see. And yeah, and now this is a good example of emphasis. I think the bridge here is a source of emphasis because of the use of color, because of the position of it. Also, you can imagine that because it's in the center of the symmetrical geometry, that matters a lot, I think. But also there being some contrast with the gray and the buildings around, and honestly, being the middle of all this bunch of high buildings, I think also helps to bring emphasis to it. In this case, the elements were used for it would be the shapes and forms of the buildings, kind of, and the shapes and forms of the bridge. Also, the color, as I mentioned, gray in comparison to the blue and mostly blue and red and sometimes white buildings. Although this one has gray in it. But anyway, with all that said, okay, does any of that help with the idea of fucking of the hill map 1442? Well, being the control point mechanically being on the bridge where is a source of emphasis, one of the sources of emphasis, yeah, ties naturally well to it. And again, I'll mention this idea. If the tall buildings were on the spawn point, maybe they would also tie to the game design of the game. But since they are not, since they could come after the spawn point, I don't see them tied to the game's mechanics. So usually I don't see it helping. But the emphasis being on the control point on the middle of the map, on this bridge, and all that stuff, which is mechanically where the control point is, ties everything well together. What about the idea? What about the buildings and stuff? Well, again, I see emphasis either on the tall blocky buildings or on the bridge, and neither of that are on the on the trapezoidal shapes, prismatic forms buildings, you know. So I don't see the emphasis helping with that iconography, let's say. What about the idea of a bridge? Easy, right? If there is emphasis on the bridge, then ties well with that being an important part of the creative vision. That's being communicated well, let's say. The idea that this is a bridge. And finally, what about the idea of some sort of high place, altitude and stuff? Well, there is emphasis on the bridge, and I guess it is on a higher ground than other parts of the map. It's not the highest point on the map, but it has some altitude to it. I guess it's helping. If the control point, if the source of emphasis was, for example, down here, where I think it's a bit, it's a bit closer to the height of these other parts, a bit, then it would be a problem. If this was a bit deeper and, and the control point was here, then I don't think the emphasis there would be helping. And the rest, everything the same, because the emphasis would still be on the bridge. But if Although the variety with the metal plate and hologram also adds some emphasis to it. But anyway, all of that, if it was underneath and stuff, it would be. I don't think it would communicate stuff well, but I think it communicates stuff well enough to me. The ideas of altitude and height and stuff. Now let's talk about the principle of balance, which is all about states of like tension or equilibrium and how even or uneven that is. Does it look like it's going to break or something, or does it look like it's going to fall down? So let's see here. Visually, right? Visually, because that's what matters for us here, looking at this as art. Because you know, if there is like some hidden dynamite inside, not if there is some hidden, I don't know, monster inside a rock that's trying to break the rock or something, then we know that because of the gameplay. You know, there will be tension there technically, but not visually, because the rocks are mostly static and balanced. You know. So anyway, visually speaking is what matters here. So, visual equilibrium or visual tension. Most things are in a lot of equilibrium. Most like we see perhaps stuff like this protruding part could add a little bit of unbalance, but very slightly. Most things are just like solid safe structures here with a lot of balance to them. In this case, this one is being held by just this thin support being here, but I think it's still visually balanced, you know. Whether or not it's easy to break the balance is a different matter, you know. Visually, I see it as being balanced and not tensioned at all, also. If this was someone using their arms to lift this thing, maybe we could see tension, but anyway. Yeah, and I don't see any parts of the architecture which seems to be being forced or anything. Here again, surprisingly, this is tilted, but it's in equilibrium because it's basically being supported by the wall here, this wall here. So it's in equilibrium, just tilted, but in equilibrium. And I don't see any tension, and I don't think I will see any tension whatsoever here. And only slight sources of this unbalance. This thing would be one, for example, very slightly tilting the center of mass, basically, of the thing. But yeah, but despite those few exceptions, most things here I see it as in equilibrium and no tension whatsoever here. Oh, interestingly, maybe the cracks, the element of texture could communicate as a bit of tension. It could be, but in this case I think these cracks are only communicating the age, let's say, of this bridge. It's an old bridge, that's why there are many cracks. I don't think I see tension in it, sadly. It would be a cool way for texture to communicate that, but I don't think I see it. But yeah. Okay, so just to recap, most things in equilibrium and I see lack of tension. So does any of that tie to Team Fortress 2 game design? King of the Hill map for Team Fortress 2? Don't think it ties in any way, right? The very few sources of imbalance that I have found are like random, are like on that stuff there, and there is also this part of the rock here, technically a very slight tilt in the center of mass, but none of that I see tied to Team Fortress 2 game design. And the balance, everything being in equilibrium, also I don't see tied to Team Fortress 2 specifically for any reason. What about the ideas of the trapezoidal buildings and prismatic buildings being prismatic form buildings being noticeable and everything? Um, well, I guess their forms and shapes are very important for the architecture to be this stable, interestingly. Because if it was... Because this is a classic way to achieve a stable building, right? Trapezoidal shapes and forms for the architecture. So I guess it's helping... Because of the choice of the shapes and forms, I guess the balance is helping there. They're being balanced. If the iconic shapes and forms were something more obtuse, let's say, then I wouldn't see it. But in this case, for the choice of something trapezoidal, with trapezoidal shapes and prismatic forms, I think the balance here is helping, interestingly. Okay, what about the ideas of a bridge? We could make a similar argument, I guess. But let's see here. This looks like somewhat of a stable bridge. Ah, no, not necessarily the same argument, because there are wooden bridges, right, which like are not exactly the most balanced thing ever. I mean, there's some balance to them, but I don't know. There are more and less balanced bridges, I guess. I don't know. I guess what matters is to see this one. This one is mostly balanced, a mostly balanced bridge, and yeah. I don't know. I guess even on the rope bridges, equilibrium is an important part of a bridge, of the concept of a bridge, right? So there being equilibrium in it, I guess, ties well to the notion of a bridge here. Basically, if you want me to talk about how the equilibrium is being achieved here, is through the symmetry in the shapes and forms, and a little bit of continuity. Also, I would say, when we're talking about unity, a little bit of the element of color and texture, because the elements of color and texture, because the bridge is gray throughout, and the cracks are also like evenly distributed, roughly. If there was a bunch of cracks on one part of the bridge, then it could look like an unstable bridge. But in here, even visually, I think it's pretty stable, and ties well to the concept of a bridge and stuff. I don't know. At least on the equilibrium here. Honestly, even if it was like a bunch of cracks on one side of the bridge, it would just look like possibly a broken bridge, I guess. I guess the question is how much the balance would be helping with that. Yeah, I don't know. Either way, in this case, I think it's helping. Just because bridges, by their very nature, have to be stable, right? Because if they're not stable, that's not a bridge. It's a broken bridge at best. I don't know. The bridges have to be stable and in equilibrium for them to not break and for you to walk through them, part of their function, I guess. Anyway, different art critics could disagree possibly, but let's now talk about the last idea, the one of high ground, high place. I don't see the equilibrium tension helping with any of that. Mountains can be stable structures in equilibrium, but I don't see that being communicated through the equilibrium, unlike for bridges. And tension even less. Fun enough, I guess if we saw the cracks, if we saw tension on one part of the bridge, we could think about a bridge that's collapsing, so I guess it would help with the idea of a bridge actually, if there was tension. But if there is not tension, I think it also helps for a different reason. But anyway, but for the idea of altitude of high place, I don't see everything being balanced and lack of tension as helping. So I don't know. And lastly, the final principle of art that I'm going to talk about is proportion, which is about the sizes of things on the artwork and how they compare to each other. So I'm kind of gonna broadly categorize parts of the artwork here. I'm gonna say that the details, like the hose, the tap, the tires, are like the smallest scale here, or proportion, both names work. The smallest ones, So this kind of details. Also the grass, I guess, are roughly on the same scale. After that, I'm going to talk about barrels and crates and others details. I think they are more on another scale. Also pipes, a number of them. After that, I'm going to mention the and also I guess the locker. I would also add to the scale of boxes and barrels. Yeah, maybe. Well, what I was going to say that after that I see the fluid container and the rocks here as a bigger proportion here, bigger scale. The container, the rocks, and what else? Mostly that, I guess. I also this wooden platform also on the same scale as the barrels, and I guess the door maybe the door and the locker have their own scales that's between the barrels and crates and the rocks and the fluid containers. Also this house here I think has similar proportion to the house and to the rocks and the fluid container. And after that, I think I'm gonna mention the bridge itself. What else? The bridge itself. And let me look at it. Okay, yeah, and after that, even bigger proportions I think are the houses, the main houses. You know, I'm broadly categorizing things here because they vary a lot in size in different parts of them, but I'm broadly categorizing it like that. And finally, this big building here with the tall structure, I would consider it an even bigger one and bigger than the houses. So that's how I'm going to categorize the proportions. To recap, small details like the hose, the grass, this bucket I guess, small details. After that, details like the crates, the barrels, the crates and barrels. After that, the locker room and the wooden doors. After that, the fluid container, the rocks, the fluid container, the rocks, and the bathroom. And the fluid container, rocks, and the bathroom. After that, the bridge itself. After that, the buildings, and after that, the bigger buildings, which are like blocky, and the tallest ones. So, does any of that help with the idea of a King of the Hill map 1442? Those proportions and their relation to each other? No? No. Oh, okay. Okay. We have something. We have the fact that the bridge has its own proportion, and I think that kinda helps to being the control point on the bridge. I think it kinda helps to tie those ideas together. You know, those concepts together for this map. Do you remember the control point? Yeah, it is on the thing with this specific size. Something like that. And again, if the control point was underneath the bridge, that wouldn't work that well, but you know. So I think it's helping with that. Although, again, the bigger buildings, these things here, could be, if they would also have similar logic if they were tied to the spawn rooms, but since they're not, it doesn't matter to me that they have the biggest proportions and a set of proportions just for them. So yeah. Anyway. Also, some houses perhaps have a similar proportion to the bridge itself. It's kind of hard to make out, not sure. No, I don't know. I still maintain that they have different ones. Anyway, okay. So yeah, helping. What about the idea of the buildings themselves? Well, them having their own scale and proportion, I think helps to memorize them more and stuff. So I think the proportions help with that. The idea is if there was something else with the same proportion it would kind of be muddled up, and you know, it wouldn't help that much. But in this case, also I guess the fact that the bridge is it kind of in the middle? Not exactly. Well, I don't know. Yeah, no, I was going to say that the proportion of the bridge is kind of in the middle, but I don't think it's that much in the middle at all. We have like small details like the bucket and hose, then the crates, then the doors and lockers, then the rocks and the bathroom, then the bridge, then the bridge, then the buildings, then the bigger building. So we have 7. It would have to be like here. So the rocks and the cylinder are in the fluid container are in the middle of the proportions. Not the bridge, so forget what I was going to say here. But anyway, yeah. But the buildings having their own proportion, I think, help to make them more noticeable, recognizable, and stuff. You don't muddle their memory, let's say, with other stuff when it comes to their sizes. After that, we have the idea of a bridge. Again, easy here, right? Because the bridge has its own proportions and nothing else. I'm considering that nothing else has the same scale as it. So conceptually, I think that helps a bit to make it iconic, recognizable, a bit. And finally, the idea of a high place and stuff. I don't see the proportions helping whatsoever. Because I mean, the bridge has its own proportion, but it's not the tallest thing here. And it's not even the biggest proportion, not even like the smallest proportion, or a proportion perfectly in the middle of things. So if you could try to find meaning in any of those, you wouldn't. So as far as the proportions go, I don't see that helping with the idea of high ground, high place. And yeah. I don't know. I'm thinking here if the tall buildings could help a bit with that idea, but I would say not. Again, being a bunch of them with this similar height, I think kinda muddles up the conveyed meaning, possibly the conveyed meaning. So I don't know. My take on this at any rate. But no matter what, I think we reached a conclusion here because most principles were helping with the creative vision in one way or another. We're tied to it, right? As I see it. So I guess it only stands to reason for me to judge this as a successful work of art. Congratulations, Valve, creators of King of the Hill Highpass. I think a lot of this stuff is recognizable and easy to notice and deliberately done by you guys. The bunch of buildings with the contrast and stuff and the unity repetition. The unity repetition and contrast also on the... Was there contrast? Well, there is unity and repetition with the idea of high ground, emphasis on the control point for the game mechanics, and contrast between both teams, and emphasis on the bridge to make us remind ourselves that this is a bridge. Also movement here. Whee! And so, yeah, a lot of stuff through different ways. I think the creative vision was achieved. So yeah, hooray! that was it for today. Join me tomorrow for more content, gameplay and art critique. See you then. Bye.